Alright, so today we're going to spend our time talking about fraction word problems. So we're going to look at 4 different problems, and we're going to go over these and talk about how we might solve them, what the equations might look like. So our first problem says, Miss Willard has 5 bags of dog food. Each day she feeds Cooper 1/6 of a bag of dog food. How many days can Miss Willard feed Cooper before she runs out of dog food? So before this whole pandemic started, Miss Willard ran out to Walmart and she grabbed up the 5 bags of Cooper's favorite dog food that she could find. She took those back home, and now she's been keeping those at home to feed Cooper off of. So we have to figure out how many days she can feed Cooper before she's got to run back out to Walmart in a panic and grab more dog food. Okay? So I have my 5 bags of dog food, and that's where I'm going to start by underlining that because I know that's what I have. And she feeds Cooper 1/6 of a bag. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to double check my question. So here's where I have my question. How many days can Miss Willard feed Cooper before she runs out of dog food? I know that I have 5 bags. And I know that each day she takes 1/6 of the bag to feed Cooper. So I'm going to start by drawing my 5 bags first. I think this may help me. So there's 1 bag, 2 bags, 3 bags, 4 bags. I'm going to make one a little bit smaller here so I can fit all 5 of them in. There we go. That's okay, guys. My bags aren't perfect. So here's the 5 bags of dog food. And she feeds Cooper 1/6 of a bag. So each day she takes a bag and she splits it up into 6. So I'm going to take the 5 bags of dog food that I have, and I'm going to cut them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, my lines aren't perfect, but that's okay. So now each day he eats 1/6. And each of those pieces represent 1/6. So what am I going to have to do in order to figure out how many days she can go off of these 5 bags of dog food? What might the equation look like just by what I've drawn here? So I took my 5 bags and I divided them into 1/6. So if you were thinking division, that's correct. Now, in order to find my answer, I have to count each individual slice that I created. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So my answer here is going to be 30 days. So it'll be 30 days before she has to run back out to Walmart in a panic to get Cooper dog food. Okay? Now, say I would have gotten 1/30 for my answer. Would that answer have made sense? If I'm thinking about days, I couldn't have a 30th of a day. That would be kind of silly. So you can remember here that anytime you start with a whole number, you're going to end with a whole number. And anytime you start with a unit fraction, you're going to end with a unit fraction. So the next problem that we're going to do says, Miss Forte is making cookies. She needs 2/3 cup of sugar for the cookies and 1/4 cup of sugar for the icing that goes on top. Miss Forte is making those cookies from Walmart that have the really pretty icing color on top that are super good. Those are some of my favorites. How many cups of sugar does Miss Forte need to make the cookies? So we have, she needs 2/3 of a cup of sugar for the cookies and 1/4 cup of sugar for the icing. So the cookies and the icing. And I want to know how many cups of sugar does Miss Forte need to make the cookies? And that's going to be how much sugar does she need to do both? She needs to make the actual cookie and then the actual icing part. So anytime that I need to find both or something together, I'm going to have to add. So if you said addition for this problem earlier, you are correct. So I'm going to write out my addition problem here. I know I have 2/3 plus 1/4. And I'm going to choose to write my addition problem vertically. You guys could totally write it 2/3 plus 1/4. Totally up to you guys. That's fine. So the first thing that I have to do when I have to add fractions is I have to find a common denominator. So I've got to make sure that I have a common denominator first, which I don't. Right now I have 3 and 4. I'm going to need to list out my multiples in order to do so. So over here, I'm going to list out my multiples of 3 and my multiples of 4. What I always like is I like just listing out the first 5 multiples. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I'm going to stop right there. And then I've got 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20. So looking right there, do I have anything in common so far? So hopefully you guys can see that I do have 12 in common here. So I've got to change my 2/3 to have a denominator of 12 and my 1/4 to have a denominator of 12. So I am going to write it out just like this. I go ahead and put 12 down there because I know that 12 is going to be my denominator. And then I'll grab my blue and I've got to ask myself, what do I multiply 3 by to get to 12? So I know that 3 times 4 is 12. So I've got to do 4 times 2, which is 8. And then 4 times 3 gives me 12. Then 1 times 3 is 3. And I am adding in this equation. So remember that when you're adding, you keep the denominator the same. My denominator is going to stay 12. The only thing I have to add are my numerators. So 8 plus 3, well, I know that 8 plus 3 is 11/12. So she would need 11/12 cups of sugar to make her cookies. The next problem we have says, Miss Snyder mixed some sugar, flour, salt, and baking soda to make a cake for her daughter's birthday. Clara's birthday was May 1st, so she's making her a cake for her birthday. The total mixture was 4 1/4 cups. So when she combined everything together, she had 4 1/4 cups of ingredients. The mixture included 2 1/2 cups of sugar. How much of the mixture was flour, salt, and baking soda? So I'm going to start here with what we know. We know that the total mixture was 4 1/4 cups. We know that it was 2 1/2 cups of sugar. And my question here is asking us, how much is flour, salt, and baking soda? So, if I know that the total amount was 4 1/4 cups, 2 1/2 was sugar, I want to figure out what the rest is. That means I'm going to have to set up a subtraction problem here. So, I'm going to have to solve 4 1/4 minus 2 1/2. And again, I'm going to choose to set it up vertically. You guys can set it up horizontally if you want to. Totally up to you. But just like when we solve an adding problem, we have to make sure that we have common denominators. And right now, 4 and 2, those are not common. But I know how to find common denominators. So I'm going to list out my multiples over here to the side. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Remember, I just start with the first 5. And then I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now, when I look at this, I notice that I have a couple numbers in common. I do not have 2 in common. Ooh, let me erase that. So, I notice that I do have 4 in common. And I also have 8 in common. if I want to use the least common denominator, I'm going to use 4 because it's the smallest one there. So I need to change both of these to have 4 as a denominator. And I think both of them are going to be pretty easy, but I think there's one that's going to stick out that's going to be really easy. So I know that 4 times what gets me 4? Well, that's just going to be 1. So that one's going to stay the same. I'm still going to have 4 1/4. But down here, 2 times what gives me 4? Well, that's going to be 2 times 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. So now I have the problem 4 1/4 minus, I need to include that, 2 2/4. But I notice another problem. 1/4 minus 2/4. Can I do that? No, I can't. I can't take 2/4 away from 1/4. So I have to regroup. So my 4 becomes a 3. And then I have to add something back over here. I have to add back my 4/4. So that gives me 5/4. Okay? So now I have to subtract 5/4 minus 2/4. So if I have 5, I take 2 away. That's going to leave me with 3. My denominator, remember, it's going to stay the same. It's going to still be 4. And then 3 minus 2 is 1. So that means that she had 1 3/4 cups of flour, salt, and baking soda. For our last question, it says a cookie recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of sugar. Mr. Meadows only wants to make half of the recipe. How much sugar will he need for half of the recipe? So I'm going to start with what I know. And I know that the recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of sugar. But Mr. Meadows doesn't want to make the full recipe. He only wants to make half of the recipe. How much sugar will he need for half of the recipe? Well, it takes 1 1/4 whole cups for the recipe. It takes 1 1/4 cups of sugar for the full recipe. He only wants to make half of the recipe. So in this one, I'm going to have to multiply because I have to figure out what 1/2 of 1 1/4 is. So I'm going to set that problem up to look like this. And if you remember what we've talked about, we have talked about changing a mixed number into an improper fraction before you multiply. So that's what we're going to have to practice first, is how do we take this number and make it into an improper fraction. So I'm going to rewrite it over here. And if you remember correctly, some of us use the acronym MAD. You have to make it MAD. The steps of MAD is that first thing you have to multiply 1 and 4. So you have to multiply your whole number and denominator. And I know that 1 times 4 is 4. I'm going to draw my backwards C here and put my 4 on top because the A in MAD then stands for addition. 4 plus 1. 4 plus 1 equals 5. Well, 5 is going to be my new numerator. So I'm going to write 5 over here. And then I just keep my denominator the same, which is 4. So 1 1/4 is the same thing as 5/4. I'm going to rewrite that down here, and then I'm going to rewrite my problem as well. So then I'm ready to solve. So whenever I multiply now, all I have to do is just multiply straight across. So numerator straight across and denominator straight across. 1 times 5 is 5. 2 times 4 is 8. So my final answer there is that Mr. Meadows would need to use 5/8 cups of sugar. As always, if you guys have any questions or aren't quite understanding something, make sure that you go back to your teacher during live or during their office hours to ask any questions.